Great, on the dot. Thanks, Mel. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon. A bit of housekeeping for me before we kick off. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the laws of Zoom now after the past year or so. But in case you've forgotten, please do keep yourself muted throughout the session so we can reduce any background noise. If you could use the Q&A function to put any questions in there for us. We're hoping that we're going to get plenty of time for your questions towards the end of the session. So please do get your questions in there and then we can respond to those. On this call today, we've got a range of classroom teachers, heads of subjects, heads of phase, head teachers, colleagues from universities, a full range of people from across the sector. We're going to talk about the new national professional qualifications, the frameworks, how we're designing and delivering them at Ambition. We're going to talk to you about what's new, why we think they matter, how you can find out if you're eligible for funding. We've got about 45 minutes together, and there's at least a day's worth of information and conversation that we could have. So we're going to get cracking. Thanks for joining. We're really excited to work with you, and we hope that we can answer your questions today. So a few words of introduction. I'm Tom Rees. I'm the Executive Director of Programmes here at Ambition. So I oversee the ECF programme that we run at Ambition, the MPQs, and a range of other programmes that you might be familiar with, like our Masters programme, the programmes that we run for executives of multi-academy trusts. I'm joined on the call today by Mel Hooson, who you've just met. Mel's our Director of MPQ programmes. Before life at Ambition, Mel was a physics teacher, secondary head, and ran a teaching school. We've also got Katie Patton here, who's our Dean of Learning Design. Katie's a former history teacher, senior leader, who then became head of curriculum at ARC Teacher Training before joining us at Ambition. Katie is now overseeing the design for our MPQ programmes. In today's session, we're going to tell you a little bit about Ambition Institute, what we're about, to explain the MPQ framework, why we think it's an exciting step forward for professional development for teachers and school leaders, and then to get into specifically our specialist MPQ programmes and talk to you a bit about those. So first of all, by way of introduction to Ambition Institute. Ambition exists to help schools transform the life chances of disadvantaged young people. We're an educational charity, and we aim to do this by helping teachers like you and those in your schools to keep getting better through high quality professional development. We think the evidence is clear that the quality of teaching is the most important factor within a school's control in improving outcomes for all children, but particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The impact of teachers on pupil outcomes is believed to be 3 times of that of any other school-based factor. So we think it's a good bet to pay attention to. And we think by helping teachers and school leaders through professional development, we can make some significant steps towards a fairer education system where every child can thrive, no matter what their background. And we do that through training teachers and leaders at all levels to get better at the things that make the biggest difference, what we teach, how we teach it, how we create the conditions for schools to thrive. We share what we think works and what we think the evidence says works. And we champion every teacher and school leader's potential to develop as the driving force for sustainable school improvement. I'm now going to share a little bit about some of the evidence that we think sits behind professional development and the impact that it has in schools. So first of all, there's quite a bit of evidence that suggests that professional development, when it's done well, can help to support the retention of teachers in the sector. We know this is a really important challenge for us at the moment to work on. And this is particularly true for new teachers. So support can significantly increase retention over the first 5 years of teachers' careers. Over the course of a teacher's career, we can also see that increased levels of professional development are associated with a reduced desire for teachers to move schools. And this is important because improving the performance of serving teachers is 3 times more effective in raising standards in schools than the combined effect of all the other attempts to improve teaching through replacement, where we might move teachers from one school to another, for example. But professional development isn't just good for teachers. It has an impact on students and student outcomes. And of course, this is why we're here. So high quality CPD shown to have a significant effect on pupils' learning outcomes. So we're going to move into the new frameworks themselves now and take a look at these. And you'll see here on your screen that there are six qualifications in MPQs. 3 of them are new on the left-hand side. So the National Professional Qualification for leading teaching, for leading behaviour, and leading teacher development. That's what we're going to focus in our webinar today, taking a look at those specialist qualifications. And then we've got the reformed leadership qualifications, SL for senior leaders, H for head teachers, and EL for executive leaders, those people who run several schools. MPQs are a national voluntary suite of qualifications and significant reforms. We've run MPQs here at Ambition now for a number of years. All those programs are just coming to an end, and sort of big reforms in the sector mean that these new programs start for the first time in November 2021. We're now going to take a quick look at the intention of these new frameworks. So there's a lot that we can send you a huge amount of reading on the Ambition website, for example, in other places, if you really want to sort of get into more detail. But we've pulled out 3 things that we think are really important and are real sort of clear intents of this framework. The first is that there is a much greater attention paid to the evidence base that sits behind these qualifications. The new frameworks have been developed taking into account a broad evidence base, which has been approved by the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF. And we think this is a big step forward. There's been lots of progress in the last 10 years across schools, and we can see it's really positive now that a lot of this is being captured, codified into professional qualifications. Of course, like any curriculum, it should be debated, challenged and defended, and that will lead to it be refined over time. But we think this is a big step forward for professional qualifications to have an evidence base that's clear that it sits upon. And the second is there's a much more specific focus on the concrete things that teachers and school leaders need to know and be able to do to be successful in their roles. So we think the frameworks take as a big step forward into codifying a core body of professional knowledge and practice, being much more specific about the things that teachers and leaders need to know and be able to do in their roles. And in particular, sort of being relevant to today's session, really breaking out the role of middle leaders in schools to look at the different types of roles they're in, such as heads of year, who might draw on that sort of qualification around behaviour and culture, or for teacher developers who particularly might find the MPQ LTD suitable for them. And the third point is this notion of the golden thread. So I'm sure you would have heard about this in lots of the sort of marketing and lots of the communications that have come out so far this term. And there's this notion that there is now much more coherence between the professional development that takes place, both from early career teachers all the way up through middle leaders and senior leaders, the golden thread, as it's being called, of professional development. So that's a brief introduction to some of the things that are changing around the National Professional Qualifications. I'm going to hand now to Mel, who's going to talk a bit more about the golden thread.
Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your time. Yeah, I wanted to dig into the golden thread a little bit more because I think it's absolutely fundamental to these reforms that we're living through at the moment. So what you can see here is that the MPQs are central to the professional development frameworks that span a teacher's career, and that goes all the way from initial teacher training right through to those leadership MPQs and beyond. Now, what research tells us is that teachers spend approximately 10 days a year each engaged in professional development. And so across our workforce, that equates to over 5 million days. And when I think about the professional development I received as a teacher and a leader and a head teacher, Often the training would feel a little bit ad hoc or disjointed, maybe even lacking in coherence. And it wasn't always clear to me how my training or development had been sequenced, or how in fact that learning mapped across to the role that I was undertaking at the time. And so a really key focus of these reforms is that we're able to make professional development more effective, more coherent, by building it all on a core body of professional knowledge. And this means that it's easier to ensure that the professional development connects to what's come before, and that it sets teachers and leaders up for the next stage of their professional learning. And that's what we're describing as the golden thread of professional practice. And it's something that as teachers, we think really, really hard about. What do we want our students to learn? How will we sequence that learning? How can I ensure my students are going back and retrieving new learning in a way that makes it stick? And now we have the same care and attention being paid to what and how we learn as teachers. So hopefully you have a better sense of what the new MPQs are aiming to achieve. And so we'll take a deeper look at those specialist MPQs. Now, these 3 new specialist MPQs are brand new, and we know that therefore they are less familiar to the sector. So under the previous framework, teachers working towards school leadership only had one opportunity to undertake an MPQ, and that was for MPQ ML, or middle leadership. And under these reforms, that qualification is no longer available, and instead teachers now have 3 options to learn about developing their teaching practice and taking their first steps into leadership. And it's these 3 new qualifications that delve much deeper into the evidence base and the application of that new knowledge. And I think it's really worth noting here that these are not just aimed at middle leaders. I think it's worth saying that the content and the pitch of these programmes is absolutely appropriate for senior leaders too. And if I were a head in a school, or if you're a head in a school, it really might be worth thinking about how you might want to support your senior leaders in your school to engage with these specialist programmes, because they will be bringing back far more depth of knowledge into school than if they all did NPQ SL, for example. What it also means is that progression doesn't have to mean promotion out of the classroom. And I think there can be a tendency in any sector, but particularly in education, to think about career progression as moving up into leadership roles. And in a school context, that can create pressure on teachers to equate progress with moving away from what they love, which is teaching pupils in the classroom. And so these specialist MPQs really validate educators who choose to develop their in-class practice through numerous professional development options, and it will really support them and help them at getting better at their time during in the classroom. They're also really relevant, and what I mean by that is all these MPQs aim to provide what teachers need to know and be able to do, and that means knowledge and skills relevant to all educators. So, for example, how do we develop an excellent culture? How do I implement change? And how do I develop and bring staff along with me through professional development? So, as an example, if you follow the MPQ LT for leading teaching, you'd be learning about how to design a great curriculum whilst also developing all those actionable insights into how you might best implement it. So those are the 3 new specialist MPQs, and I think we'll dig now into each one in a little bit more detail. We'll start here for the MPQ in leading teacher development, and this is for people who have or aspire to have responsibility for developing other teachers. So you might be a classroom teacher with those aspirations. You might be a mentor of other teachers or of initial teacher training. You might be the CPD lead in your school or across a trust who has responsibility for writing your professional development plan for the year, designing and delivering those sessions. And so firstly, looking at becoming a teaching expert, all the training here is evidence-based and informed by the science of learning. So you'll be answering questions like, how do we learn? How do we make new knowledge stick? And how do I develop the teachers in my school to operate in that way? We'll also be championing teacher quality. And by that, I mean, we know that many teachers who end up in leadership roles haven't really had any formal training in terms of how to become a teacher educator. So I know early in my career, I was asked to be a mentor and mentor new teachers, and nobody told me how to do that. And I went off and did it with the very best of intentions, but it might have looked very different to how Tom would have mentored his new teachers, for example. And we know that developing other teachers is really complex work. As adults, we don't change easily, we don't change our habits and our behaviours easily. And so if you're trying to develop teachers in your school or your phase or your department, how can we do it in such a way that it will impact on their habits, their behaviours, their decisions in the long term? And the teachers we know in your school are not just going to change their classroom practice just because we sit them in the hall for CPD and ask them to do things differently. It's complex, it needs careful planning, and the change always takes longer than we think. And so in this qualification, you'll be taken through exactly how to plan and deliver that high quality professional developments for your teachers in a way that has a long lasting impact. Like all the MPQs, it's also very flexible. It's been designed to fit around your busy teaching role, and much of the work can be completed in very short bursts, 45 minutes a week, around your existing schedule. And we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail shortly. So on the next slide, you can see some of the detail around eligibility and funding and what role. So I'm just going to leave that there for a moment for you to absorb some of that information. So what's really exciting about this qualification is that if you're in an English school and it's a state school, this qualification will be fully funded for you. So a really great opportunity to support you in moving into that role of developing other teachers, or to really scaffold the learning if you're already in that role and make sure and enable you to plan and deliver that CPD. The kind of role that you might be in now, you might be a mentor of ITT or early careers teachers, you might be the CPD lead across a trust or in your school, head of department, second in subject. These are all roles that we would welcome you onto this programme, because that teacher development will be threaded through all of our work. I think in terms of red flag roles, early career teachers will be going through the early careers framework, and so possibly not appropriate for them. And we really need you to be a teaching member of staff to be able to mentor and develop those teachers around you. We'll look next at the MPQ for LT, which is for leading teaching. And this is aimed at people who lead a team of teachers. So you might, for example, in a secondary school be a head of science or a head of arts. You might in a primary school be a head of phase or head of key stage or a head of a year group. And what you'll be looking at here is how to lead that team of teachers in terms of writing the long-term curriculum, mid and short-term curriculum. How do you develop them to implement that curriculum with fidelity and with the right pedagogical choices? And so in terms of excelling as a teacher, firstly, we'll be delving into the nuts and bolts of what makes an effective teacher, what good teaching looks like, and how you can lead others, how they will learn for you. Building on existing experience, we'll be unpacking and applying learning in teaching, curriculum and assessment, and you'll be supporting others to develop in those areas as well. Again, very, very flexible around your timetable, and you'll also be connecting with your peers, because we think it's really important that you train alongside other teachers in different contexts, and you can share your experiences and really build that strong support network. So again, on the next slide, we have more information around eligibility and funding. So in terms of eligibility for the funding, if you are in the PP30 schools, so the top 30th percentile of pupil premium schools, this programme will be fully funded. For teachers in other schools, we're in constant conversation with the Department for Education around widening that funding. And so what we would recommend is that you register on our system, make sure that the application is started, and then we'll be able to continue those conversations on your behalf and get back to you within the next 10 working days around funding and the eligibility there. Green flag roles then, heads of department, absolutely, head of key stage, head of phase or head of subject in a primary school, and again, probably not appropriate if you're an early career teacher or you're a member of non-teaching staff. And then thirdly, we will come on to the MPQ in behaviour and culture. And this would be appropriate again if you're an aspiring middle leader that is interested in going down that behaviour or pastoral route. It's also for heads of department if this is something you're particularly interested in and you'd like to support your department in this. So in terms of becoming an expert, whatever your ultimate career goal is, this will offer that continuous professional development. I think all of us working in schools are leaders of behaviour and culture. In terms of that driving meaningful change, you'll be developing your knowledge specifically around leading behaviour and culture. You'll be applying it in practice across your school and answering questions like, how do I engage and motivate my staff and pupils in a way that will have impact on disruption in classrooms, for example. I think building that positive school culture is really key to these roles as well. So this will be learning to think beyond managing individual classrooms and looking at how do we develop those school-wide systems and processes that support our students so that we can really get the very best out of them. And again, flexible around your timetable, and you'll be working alongside your peers so that you can really build that network. And so eligibility for leading behaviour is the same as for leading teaching, if we look on the next slide, and that's around funding is guaranteed if you're in those PP30 schools. If you're not in that top 30th percentile of pupil premium schools, we would recommend you still apply. We will have those conversations on your behalf and we'll be able to get back to you. The green flag roles here are slightly different. So you might be a head of year, for example, you might be a safeguarding lead. I think what's really key to point out, particularly around this one, but it's relevant to all of them, is that you don't need to have QTS to apply for these programs. So you might be a non-teaching head of year and you might not have qualified teacher status. You're still absolutely welcome to engage with these programs. So if you have any questions around that, please do pop them in the Q&A box, and Tom and Katie and I will be able to answer them. But to clarify, you don't need qualified teacher status for any of these MPQs. So if I were sitting in this webinar, I would want to know what's my time commitment here, how much of my life is this going to take up? And so we'll have a look now at the programme structure and what the next 12 months would look like for you. So this is an overview of all of the specialist MPQs, and all the specialist programmes are 12 months long. They are all beginning on November the 1st, this November. And what you can see here is that a couple of weeks before November the 1st, you would have a 2-week induction. And that would be on our online platform. You would receive the programme orientation, become familiar with your programme journey, the learning platform that we're using, etc. And then we begin in early November with a 6-hour conference. And during that 6-hour conference, we'll really be getting under the hood of the science of learning, implementation, and looking at the detail of the modules and courses that are to come. Those 6 dark blue blocks that you can see there are each a half term. So the first block will be November, December, the second block, January, February, etc. So each of those dark blue blocks is a 6-week course, and you will have 6 of those 6-week courses over the course of 12 months. In a moment, we'll have a look at those in more detail, but before we do, I just wanted to draw your attention to the assessment window at the end. So this comes at the end of the programme, so we will now be looking at November 2022 when this assessment window opens. And this is one of the huge changes when compared to the old MPQs. So in November 2022, there will be an 8-day assessment window, and on day 1 of those 8 days, we will release to you a case study of around 2,000 words, and you'll then have 8 days to respond to us with a 1,500 word response. And that's how we assess you. So if you've lived through an MPQ ML or SL previously, you'll be very aware of those projects and tasks that need to be implemented alongside your qualification, alongside your day job. Those projects need to be written up and implemented, and the DFE have listened to a lot of feedback that those projects could become quite unwieldy. The workload was quite high trying to do it on top of your day-to-day job. And so those projects have been removed completely, and you have this 8-day assessment window at the end of your course. The reason that's a 3-month window is because that's what we have to mark your assessments, moderate them internally and externally, and then feed your results back to you. So I think we'll zoom into one of those dark blue blocks so that we can see what a 6-week course looks like on your MPQs. And what you'll see here is there are insight and application modules, there are clinics, and there are communities. So I'll just let you absorb that for a moment before I talk around each aspect. Okay, so a 6-week course. These blue and yellow blocks you can see here are your modules week by week. So on week 1 for the Insight module, you would be logging on to our online platform, and all of these modules, Insight and Application, are done via StepLab, which is our online learning platform. So you log on, you're going to need about 45 minutes a week. And in your Insight module, that's where we really get under the hood of the research and the evidence base. And so there will be reading, there will be some videos, there'll be some self-reflection questions. And those Insight modules have been mapped really carefully to the DFE MPQ frameworks. And you'll do that individually. You can do it at a time to suit you. You could do it in school, you could do it at home, you can do them on your devices, so you could do them on the train. It's been designed to fit around your timetable. On week 2 then, on an application module, you would be buddying up with somebody else from your cohort. So let's say Tom and I were buddies on the MPQ LTD. We would be saying, okay, Tom, I will meet you on Zoom on Tuesday afternoon, and we would go through the application module together. And this is where we look back at the learning from the Insight module. We think about how that looks in our context, in Tom and my different context. We will hold each other to account in terms of what actions are you now going to take to start to implement that learning. And this is where that habit change really starts to happen. You have a buddy that you can analyze the Insight module with, you have somebody to ask questions, what does this look like in your context, and somebody to hold you a little bit accountable for implementing those actions. So that cadence continues all the way through the 6-week course and then continues into the following half term in the same way. We also have a 2-hour clinic each half term, and these are facilitated. And the clinics are really an opportunity to look back at the modules from the previous half term and begin to make sense of some of that learning. So we have really skilled facilitators who understand the common misconceptions. They know where the barriers might be in different schools, in different contexts. So we can really start to unpick any barriers and support you to overcome them. And then you can see they're a 1-hour community, and they happen once a half term as well. So they're not facilitated, they're very much a networking opportunity for you to meet around 15 people from your cohort. It's still quite structured. We will provide a protocol for those conversations, but not facilitated, an opportunity to build and rely on your network. So over a course of half term, in terms of time commitment, you'd be looking at 40 to 45 minutes a week online, then a 2-hour clinic per half term and a 1-hour community per half term as well. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. And this was about projects, and I really wanted to reiterate that those unwieldy projects that we knew existed previously have completely gone from these new MPQs. And personally, I think it makes them a far more attractive option. The only assessment is going to take place in November 2022 in that 8-day assessment window. So I think I have spoken quite enough now, so I think we'll go to questions. I can see the chat, lots and lots going off in the chat. So Katie and Tom, can I hand over to you momentarily? I don't know if you've picked up any common themes in the chat and in the questions that we want to pick up on.
Hi, Tom, I don't know if you want to jump in, or I've got a few things to pick up on.
You go ahead, Katie.
So if anybody else has any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So we've been answering questions directly, but a couple of questions about calendars that came through before Mel did that last section, i.e. how tightly mapped to these calendars. So they are roughly mapped to a half term. A lot of that learning is flexible and asynchronous around your diary. There are some live events, the conferences, the communities and the clinics, which will be calendarized and planned out in advance for those sessions. And then linked to that, around what about if for whatever reason we can't attend, content is missed. So for asynchronous content, obviously you can just work that around your schedule. And obviously we want to emphasize that attendance is really important. There's lots of evidence and stuff to cover in these programs in order to do really well on your assessment. However, we're also super aware that schools are busy places and things happen, and teachers have lives as well and things happen. And therefore we've thought really hard about the catch-up offer, associated with each of the components. So absolutely, yes, there will be opportunities for catch up for those circumstances and times when it isn't possible to attend.
Thanks, Katie. And on that attendance piece, there's a couple of questions around when is the induction or orientation, because people are away for half term, etc. We're going to release that on the 18th of October. And the reason we've chosen that date is because hopefully it gives people a week of term time and then a week of half term to engage with that content, which will take about 2 hours. So it'd be up to you if you wanted to do it during term time or if you wanted to do it over October half term. But it's online, it would be waiting on your platform for you to log in. So as long as you can commit 2 hours from the 18th of October before your course starts in November, then that will be absolutely fine.
Mel, we've had a question about what about if you move between courses, if you move schools between courses.
Yeah. And we've written this in. We're very keen to support that mobility. Some of it will depend on, let's say, for example, you go from a school that's funded to a school that's not funded. You would need to have the support and the backup of your head teacher. But as I say, we're in conversation with the Department for Education around that. But yes, we would support you in moving. And because it's so flexible, because much of it is done online and even your facilitated sessions are largely done online, there is no issue with you finishing one school in December, for example, and picking up in January at another school. What we might have to do is if you have a buddy that is in your school, you could choose to continue with that buddy because you would just continue those meetings over Zoom, or it might be that we would need to repair you, but it's absolutely doable. We've designed it with that in mind.
We've had a few questions about people having missed the first section of the webinar and whether they're going to get access to the recording. My understanding is if you signed up, you'll get a recording following the session, so don't worry about that. And linked to some of those questions, people asking us to go over assessment again and what assessment looks like. And I think it's worth pausing there because it's really different from legacy MPQs where you would have done a project, written up a project over time, over the course of your MPQ. So now that the projects are gone, instead what you do at the end of the programme within a 3-month window is an assessment, which I suppose looks a bit like an open book exam. So you get a case study, 2,000-word case study, which represents a scenario a school leader might be likely to face in a school, and you have to respond to that scenario using what you've learned on the programme about what the evidence base is that sits behind that, and what kind of some of the strategies you might deploy are. So that's the assessment. That sounds a little bit daunting in comparison to a project which you can craft over time. So we've thought really hard about how we prepare you for that over the course of the programme. So those clinics Mel talked about, they're all very much scenario based. So you'll get facilitated sessions throughout the programme that get you used to thinking in terms of, here's a scenario, what have I learned on the programme, how do I apply this to the setting? And we've also got a support package in advance of the assessment window where you'll have access to a clinic specifically focused on the assessment and 2 asynchronous webinars as well, which can walk you through the process and help you to understand what to expect.
Great, thank you, Katie. And a couple of questions have just appeared in the Q&A box. One of them, are the clinics in the afternoons or the weekends? Through our central programmes, we're not running any weekend sessions, and so those clinics are running as twilights. So they're either 4 till 6 in the afternoon, straight as we finish school, or later on into the evening, 6 o'clock till 8 o'clock. So we have avoided putting them in the middle of the school day, and we've avoided putting them in weekends. And that's 1 clinic, just as a reminder, 1 clinic per half term. Another question, I'm due to go on maternity leave. Can this be started and then picked back up? Absolutely, it can. So let's say, for example, you do 3 courses, you do course 1, 2 and 3, which would take us to February half term, and then you go on maternity leave. When you return from maternity leave, you would pick up to do course 4, 5 and 6. And so it doesn't need to be done all in one go. You will pick up with a cohort or probably 2 cohorts behind you at the point at which you left. So that's called a deferral. That's been agreed with the Department for Education. Absolutely. Again, the flexibility has been designed with that in mind. Katie, one for you. Is there any more detail we can give in terms of content within those 6-week courses? I
mean, yes. So they're really there's not a lot of flexibility in terms of the what is being taught. So the frameworks themselves are really descriptive in terms of what school leaders need to know and what they need to know how to do. And those DFE, if you want to get a real sense of what's being taught in the programmes, a good place to start would be actually to look at the frameworks themselves, which are freely available on the DFE website. In terms of what's available, we've shared our curriculum maps through our delivery partners. As soon as you sign up to the programmes, your conference will go through lots of detail in terms of what you're learning. So the content itself is kind of carefully mapped to the frameworks. And yes, I can share curriculum maps, Mel. We can talk about how we kind of share that kind of overview. Yeah. I have a tendency to go into too much detail about this stuff, but yes, essentially each of the 6-week courses has got a theme, and there are some common themes across all of those specialist MPQs as well, Mel. So it doesn't, whether you're a head of year or a head of department or a Senko, there are some kind of core elements around like implementation, for example, enabling conditions for teachers to be successful. What does professional development look like? These things are applicable to all of those specialist roles and specialist programs. So as well as some real deep dives into the content specific to the MPQ, whether that's leading behaviour, leading teaching or leading teacher development, there's also the core golden thread components that are strung across all of those specialist and leadership MPQs as well.
Great, thanks Katie. And actually if you go to our website, there is more information on the curriculum there, and so on each page for each of the different MPQs there are tabs across the top, and there is a curriculum tab for each of these MPQs, so that will give you a little bit more detail there as well. Somebody has said, I originally signed up to start in February 22. Can I get going this November? Yes, absolutely you can. And so it might be that you've already told our applications team that you want to start in February, and I will be showing an email to you in a moment where you can get in touch with our applications team and just let them know that you want to start in November, and they will just move their cohort for you. And the deadline, we've still got another 2 weeks until the deadline, so plenty of time if you did want to apply ready for this November cohort. Any other themes or questions we haven't answered? Tom, I don't know if you've spotted anything.
Just the funding question again, Mel. Not sure if there's a bit more you can say about that.
Oh, so, this is, yeah, I can see Zach in the chat.
Yes, asking about
extra funding.
Yeah, so we said obviously in the presentation about some of the qualifications being fully funded, but for schools who are in the PP30, so the 30% highest levels of pupil premium, those qualifications being free. But obviously there's a bit more information that we've had recently. So did you want to share that?
Yes, so we've been in conversations with the Department for Education about widening this funding, and nothing has been confirmed yet. But we are talking to our delivery partners and participants about what this would mean, and so we're really hoping we can come back to you with some more concrete information in the next couple of weeks. But whilst we're having those conversations, I would really recommend that you get signed up, get into our system and start the application process so that it's not a rush for you ahead of the 12th of October. And as soon as we possibly can, we'll be coming back to confirm with you if that funding does get widened.
That's great. So we've got no more questions in the Q&A box. I'm just checking the chat again. Yes, Neil, applications are open till the 12th of October. That's correct. Anything after that would be, you can still start this year, but it would be a February start in 2022 rather than a November start in 2021. So that's good. Thanks, Neil. Now, we've been doing Zoom webinars well enough to know that if there are no more questions, you should never sort of keep going and pad it out, especially at this time in the evening, an incredibly busy term. So
I think if we can just have that final slide up, that I think that'll give people the information they need so that they can rush off and log onto our website and get registered. So if we could share slides for a moment longer, that'd be really helpful. Okay, so as we said, the application deadline is the 12th of October. That's a couple of weeks away. And probably the swiftest way to go about this is to email applications@ambition.org.uk. We will be sending out some comms to you all anyway if you've signed up to this webinar, So you'll be getting a little bit more information with these links on and the slides. But please do get in touch with that applications email if you have any further questions. But this is a fantastic opportunity, a really exciting time to be joining us at Ambition, and we'd be really looking forward to working with you. So good luck, and we hope to see you all very soon.